Blade was a risless degenerate who retired from his hero duties to find a cure for his virginity. However, after enrolling in a school for knights, he ended up being hated by the popular baddies, so he decided to pull all stops and clap them into submission. But before all this, Blade went toe-to-toe with the Demon Lord, and after wrecking their environment in a DBZ style, they poked each other with their weapons, leading to their demise, or so it seemed. Months later, Blade finally got one of his wishes answered, which was to enroll in an academy and live life as an ordinary person, and a very huge prerequisite for that is to make friends. Brimming with confidence, he approached everyone and asked a good number of them to be his friends, until he eventually ran into Ernest Flaming, a hottie above his class who didn't care one bit about the one-pump chump. After realizing he was a new student, she got mad at the school for lowering its standards by accepting a creep who blatantly told her his motive was to have a harem. Offended, she dragged Blade to the principal's office to get him yeeted, but then realized that not only was their new principal Gil, the king of the country, but he knew Blade personally and wanted to speak to him privately. Left alone, the king asked Blade to regain his powers as a hero, but he refused, saying he wanted to be as normal as the side characters watching this recap. As if stuffing the boy's ideals inside the trash, the king insisted on Blade recovering his powers so that he could nurture his students. Later at noon, Ernest freaked out when she saw Blade show up at the advanced class, so she concluded that he rubbed the examiners' backs. She got even more offended by his laid-back attitude. After watching him shake hands with all the ladies, including Sophie Rain, Ernest immediately had Blade tried, and when he was given armor to scratch, he obliterated not only the target but the entire surrounding area, including Ernest's plot armor.
Nice.
Ever since, she became curious, and she allowed him to eat with her during lunch. And there, Blade told her he'd want her for dessert. Later that evening, in her dorm, as she took a whiff out of her pillow which reminded her of Blade, her sword called to her, begging for blood, so she used all her resolve to resist it. The next day on the training ground, Aratus fought against Leonard and Sophie, overexerting herself till she passed out. So Blade rushed her to the infirmary and teased her about the PT strip having double markings. At first, the doctor didn't agree to let her leave, but with his help she got out of the place and walked back to resume her class. Later, Blade logged into the academy database and read up about Ernest's cursed sword, which he suspected was the cause of her dilemma. He then confronted her about it, and after hearing a bit of her backstory, he convinced her to make a pact with it. A few moments later, Aratus did as he told her, but she ended up as Heat Blast from Timu. In her mindscape, she wrestled with Asmodeus, the demon in her sword, and with the Blade's backing, she overpowered it, forcing it to accept the pact. The next day during training, Ernest scolded Blade for not paying attention to the student who went against him. Suspecting something was different about her, Blade tried so hard to guess what was up, but his already maxed out memory fries like a faulty circuit. He then noticed Sophie training alone, so he went to meet her to help her out. First, he took his sweet time to get her to lower her guard. Then he tried convincing her to try his Excalibur. Unfortunately, the instructor wrapped up the class for the day, preventing Blade from bagging the stoic chick. Later that evening, after school, Blade tried teaching Sophie the way of the sword. At first, she struggled with it, swinging it every which way, but demonstrates how fighting spirit is applied and easily cuts through the armor like butter. Within a few hours, Sophie got the very basics and could easily cut down armor. This made Blade happy and he cheered for her, so Sophie asked him if she could defeat Aratus, but Blade struggled to answer. To his surprise, Sophie locked him in between her thighs, giving him first-class whiffing access to her safe zone. And she told Blade she would stick to her hand-to-hand style against Aratus. Later, the principal called Blade to his office and asked for his progress report. Blade then informed him that he was able to make friends with Aratus and Sophie. Hearing the latter, Gil informed him that Sophie's real name wasn't Sophie Rain, but the 12th duplicate of Sophia I, made by an evil group to have her surpass Blade. Unfortunately, she was considered incomplete, which was why she only responded to orders. Realizing he was the cause of Sophie's situation, Blade stormed out of the office, blaming himself for robbing Sophie of her life. In that instant, he made up his mind to help her get back to normal. Unfortunately, he had no clue what being normal was, so he asked the school doctor and nearly got roped up into a role-playing session with her. After getting an answer out of her, he runs off to ask Leonard, before rushing to Aratus' door and asking her what a date meant. Shocked by his question, the tsundere blushed as she deluded herself, thinking they were going too fast. After she told him what it meant, he ditched her and ran looking for Sophie. He casually waltzed into the girls' locker room and feasted his eyes on Sophie's knockers before asking her on a date. Later that evening, Sophie arrived just in time and saw him holding a dating guidebook which he had read beforehand. At first, he got confused about what to do, but Sophie took charge by locking her hands in his and walking to the first place on the list. Meanwhile, Aratus teamed up with Jessica and Claire, and they monitored Blade and Sophie's movement. Right there, they befriended her, and it made the Iron Empress very happy. At one point, Blade shared a drink with Sophie, and closing the distance between them made his heart race. Later that night, Sophie thanked Blade for giving her so much screen time, so she asked him why he put so much effort. He tried hiding his real intentions with a smile, but she saw right through him, and then opened up to him that she was the artificial hero. Sophie then showcased some of the hero's powers before him, belittling herself that she wasn't the real deal. Unable to hold back his guilt, Blade opened up to her that he was the hero and apologized to her for making her life miserable by being the standard for her, but to his surprise, Sophie didn't hate him. Instead, she called him a great hero and told him she wanted to be like him. With that, they held hands and decided that his title would be their little secret. Days later, during break at the cafeteria, Blade stuffed his tummy with rice and curry, and it got on his face, so Ernest pointed it out, and to her surprise, Sophie cleaned it for him, acting like a doting wife, which made Ernest immediately freak out. Jessica and Claire, who bonded with Ernest while they stalked Blade the other day, showed up and joined them at her table. They asked Blade curiously if he liked their outfit, and that's when he realized that they've moved up to the advanced class. They discuss what the principal had in store for them, as they've heard he planned to bring a magical beast to school on that day. Suddenly, they all felt tremors echo around them, and while they were troubled, Sophie whispered to Blade like Lois Lane to Clark, to do his heroic duties. The sound got louder, and they finally saw the cause. It was a dragon who stormed into the hallway, heading for the cafeteria. By that time, Blade had rushed to the commotion just like Sophie had wanted, and as soon as he saw the dragon, he leapt into the air and smacked it to the ground. Blade then informed them that the dragon was a baby. He gave the creature his food, thinking it was normal to subdue monsters, but the fearful look he got from the student made him realize he was acting off the charts, as he tried mansplaining his way out of this one. The dragon shrank into a girl. Not knowing where the dragon went, he looked around, so Aratus told him it transformed into the girl nearby, but Blade refused to believe her. The girl then latched onto Blade, calling him her parent. Left with no choice, Blade took her in and named her Later, while having a soak, he doted on the girl like a father. Ernest then entered his room and explained to him that the reason Cook could transform into a human could be because she got overpowered easily by one. Ernest suddenly realized Blade was washing Ku's, so she got mad at him and left her footprint on his face for rejecting her bathwater. The next day at the cafeteria, Ku acted spoiled in front of the others, sticking to Blade alone, and like a gatekeeper, she prevented others from letting her. Her actions made Blade's sticks go down further, and during training, the rest of the students refused to talk to him, isolating him for bagging a possessive dragon. Ku showed up shortly after, wanting Blade's love and attention, but she saw he was busy, so she left him. On getting to the intermediate and beginner class, Ku spotted a group of students who invited her to train with them, but the dragon sadly informed them that they wouldn't hold a candle to her. She stormed off frustrated, and to her surprise, she ran into Blade. Later that night, while Ku was asleep, Aratus came knocking to get a glimpse of Blade's glizzy, so they head to the rooftop, where no one would distract them and talk about Ku being an effect of dragon's bad parenting. Aratus then informed Blade that he won't be able to protect Ku forever, and he agreed with her, but after she saw how serious he was about parenting the dragon, she informed him that Sophie was also worried about him. Sophie immediately showed up on the rooftop, so Blade reassured her that he was fine and he'd take care of everything. With that, the girls took their leave. Right after their discussion, he went back to his room but didn't find Kun there, so he went outside and saw her on the rooftop and climbed to join her. She looked at the moons, referencing how the younger one stood by the bigger one's side, which she called its parent. Blade then asked her what she felt about having friends, but Ku brushed it off, saying dragons didn't need to rely on others since she had him. The next day, Blade brought up Ku's issue to the principal, and he was reminded how useless the old bum was when it came to affairs that mattered. After school, Blade returned to his dormitory and saw Ku playing house with dolls. Observing her keenly, he realized she knew the names of all the students in the school and she wanted to be friends with them. The realization served as a low blow that he walked past Aratus and struck his head on the wall repetitively in regret. The red-haired quickly stopped him and demanded that he tell her what was wrong, so he opened up to her about the dragon's situation. How Kafue couldn't befriend anyone weaker than her due to her nature, but she wanted to be friends with them. Ernest got angry and scolded him for not reaching out to her all this time. She felt bad because he said they were friends. Meanwhile, he felt he could handle the situation alone. This time around, she decided to take up matters. So the following day, they approached the intermediary training ground and addressed the students, pleading with them to fight Ku and beat her. Logically, it seemed impossible, but the students couldn't respond. To their surprise, all the students from the advanced class showed up and did the same, so they had no choice but to accept the request. Days later, Q flew down to the training ground where over 100 students prepared to battle her. Meanwhile, Gil watched from his podium excited about how the battle would turn out. Siren, his assistant, however, wondered if Q would acknowledge defeat if it came from such a large number of students. But Gil disagreed, informing her that dragons saw humans as creatures who work collectively just like the way humans never considered bees cowardly for fighting as a swarm. Although Gil was excited, he wished he could see Blade in action, but that wouldn't be possible since he had already bonked the dragon earlier. Blade in return wished Kuis could turn Gil into a roasted bacon. Before the battle, Blade encouraged Ku to go all out against her opponent so the match would seem fair and square, while Aratus on the other hand riled the students up like knights preparing for the most gruesome battle ever. The match commenced with Ku breathing her flames on them and using her tail to smack them around like ping pong, and as the students ran around in fear, Aratus stood up to the dragon, hurling her flame at it. She then reminded them to stick to their formations, which they practiced during training. They immediately charge at Kua's flanks and use their shields to protect the other squad members. The dragon then tried to disrupt their formation, but they hurled attacks at it from its blind spot. The students then dashed at it, with their morales high, and Ernest coordinated their formation, ensuring they suffered as minimal damage as possible. Unfortunately for them, Ku used her tail to the fullest, whipping them every which way. This was because their attacks dealt little to no damage. Ku continued her rampage while some of the students tried to heal their injured comrades. While at it, Gil walked to meet Blade, telling him that the fight was over, but Blade looked unyielding, believing that the students still had some tricks up their sleeves. Sophie instantly leapt at the dragon and punched it so hard, it nearly lost its balance. Ernest then followed up with her flames, hitting the dragon squarely. Despite the strong attack, Gil concluded that it wasn't enough to stop Q, and to his surprise, Blade agreed, but he noted that the heavy attack would make Q lose awareness of her surroundings, which was what the students were originally after. A few seconds later, the dragon stepped into a quagmire and fell splat on the ground. It was only successful thanks to Leonard, who dug the ground while the others fought Kuid. Despite the element of surprise, Gil and Blade noted that the attack wasn't enough to beat Kuid, which meant the battle was just beginning. The students dashed at the dragon, so she used her flames on them, but to her surprise, Aratus offset it with hers, and used her sword's ability like a deranged person. It left Asmodeus begging for help. Realizing that its flame had been quenched, Ku tried going airborne to prevent the humans from pouncing on her, but Sophie leapt into the air and delivered a gravity-amped punch that sent Ku crashing back onto Earth. Ernest immediately charged her flames, and with the help of others who magically amped her, it smacked Ku right out of her dragon form, leaving her struggling to catch her breath. With the match finally over, Ku felt sad that she lost, thinking Blade would abandon her for being weak, but he vowed not to do such a thing and corrected her notion, saying she wasn't weak but the humans were simply stronger. He then informed her what to do, and at first Ku tried to be mean about it, but after a chop on the head, she pleaded with everyone to become friends with her, and they all agreed. Several days later, Gil arranged for the construction of a virtual reality device in the arena to help the students train at their best. Later during lunch, as the students fed Kudo, Blade noticed Arata had gotten way chubbier, and as the others tried to shush him, he blurted it out casually that she had gained weight and had gotten bigger, which led her to run away in shame while calling him a moron. The others scolded him for his blunt remark, and Jessica said she wouldn't be surprised if Aratus was through with him. Not knowing what she meant, he felt very bad and sulked like a child, but the others showed up and told him what he had to do. He quickly made up his mind to apologize to her, but the girls stopped him, knowing fully well that he didn't know what for. They then offered to go with him because his mouth could ruin his chances on multiple levels. Later that night, they knocked at Aratus' door informing her that Blade had come to apologize, but they didn't get any response, so Jessica brought out a tool and picked on her door. After successfully getting in, they hear her making funny noises as if climaxing in the dark, but Ku joined her after smelling something sweet. Curious, the others turned on the lights and they discovered she was munching on a lot of sweets. Ernest then explained that ever since their fight against Ku, she had started feeling hungry all the time. And it wasn't until recently that she realized that sweet snacks existed. To clear things up, Blade confirmed that she wasn't avoiding him because she was mad at him, but she couldn't bring herself to talk to him looking like a balloon. Realizing that Arata still considered him as her friend, Blade casually walked away. The others quickly stopped him and demanded that he help Aratus fight her habits by saying something nice to her. As expected, Blade fumbled his chance by asking if she wanted him for dessert, so they scolded him and asked Leonard to show him how it's done. Immediately, the simp got a chance. He rushed at Aratus and declared his affections for her, saying it didn't matter her size. Unfortunately for him, she got annoyed and punched him for calling her fat. Blade then gave her a shoulder to lean on, promising her that they would help her get back in shape. The next day, Aratus ran like the weight of the world was in her tummy. They tried getting her into shape by helping her burn calories through sit-ups, squats, push-ups, and even controlling her diet, but when she stepped on the weighing scale, it read to be continued. Left with no other option, Aratus decided to try one more thing, which was to train with Blade. At the arena, she asked him if he would let her have his premium sausage if she successfully pulled it off, and he agreed, even though she shouldn't be allowed to snack on anything.
Emotional, damn it!
With that, she pulled out her cursed blade and then summoned Asmodeus's flame. Happy to be out, the flame demon asks her who he's to fight, but she shocks him by saying he's simply using her to burn her calories. With the flame's high energy consumption, Aratus returned to shape in no time but with a claws. She suffered from extreme hunger pangs, which made her almost lose her humanity, and she stared at her friends like KFC. Without wasting much time, she dashed at them like they were a limited offer all-you-can-eat buffet. But Blade used his sword pressure to blow out her flames like a candle, returning her to normal. Shortly after, she woke up in his arms and he congratulated her on a job well done. Later that night, when her friends came over to visit her, they saw her feasting on sweets, and she had returned to her plump stature again. In her defense, she said she could easily revert by using her sword's flames to burn her calories. One time at the infirmary, the doctor examined Blade and informed him that he was 30% compared to his prime, and if he tried reaching the said value, he'd unalive himself. He left the infirmary and came across Claire, who introduced him to Maria, a four-eyed background character who could be mistaken for a wall poster. Surprisingly, Blade remembered her exotic battle against Ku, how she wallpapered her face time and time again on the battlefield. Blade called her a klutz, but upon realizing how it affected her, he quickly apologized. Maria then asked him for a favor, which was to send her to the afterlife if she ever lost control. Shortly after, she told Blade and the others that there was something else that existed inside of her. Before the others could tell her to go to the hospital, Blade confirmed that she was a demon. Maria then explained to them that whenever she lost control of the being inside her, she broke things and acted clumsily. She then asked him for help because she had nowhere to turn to, and if things had continued that way, she would be kicked out of the school. Moved by Maria's backstory, Blade and the others offered to help her. Later that evening, they meet at the arena where Blade ensured they put up a very strong barrier. He then asked Maria to release her grip, but she refused, scared that she would run wild. Blade and Aratus had to assure her over and over before she could agree. With that, she took off her limiters, referencing the legendary Lee vs. Gara. After getting rid of her necklace, wings sprouted and a devilish symbol glowed on her head. Alternate Maria then cockingly declared herself as the Demon King, ordering them to bow before her. At first, the others mistook her for the Demon King, but Blade said otherwise. Immediately, the hot-tempered Aratus took on her flames transformation and leapt at the self-proclaimed Demon King. But with a swing of her arm, the air pressure blew Aratus' flames out like a candle, sending her crashing into the ground. Leonard also charged with his lance, and at this point, he's used as a plot device to showcase how strong Alta Maria is, because she instantly swatted Leonard away like a pesky bug. Sophie then dashed at the Demon King, and grabbed her before enforcing gravity on her. Ku immediately transformed into a dragon, and fired her breath at the demon. but Alt Maria simply compressed her flames into a tiny ball before striking her back with it. The end result left Ku sprawled like Yamcha. With the others easily taken down, Blade decided to take her on. At first, he tried fighting her without killing intent, so she edged him on by smacking him away and trying to overpower him with an attack. In the process, his sword crumbled to dust, so Arata showed up and handed him her cursed blade. Amused, Alt Maria watched them and confidently told Blade to put on his best, so he showed her he wasn't her plaything by increasing his magic output into the cursed sword up until the weapon begged him to stop. He then launched his attack on the demon, and she parried it thinking it was over. To her surprise, more flames kept pouring out, and she wondered who exactly was the boy before her. The attack not only cracked her shield and smacked her squarely in the head, but it broke the barrier and nearly destroyed her environment. Blade, who was clearly exhausted, confirmed that everyone was still breathing before he collapsed. Later, he woke up in the infirmary and the doctor worriedly clung to him, giving him a tier 1 face massage with her knockers while scolding him for risking his life despite her warning. Blade quickly hugged her and apologized for causing her trouble, and after she calmed down, he learned that his friends were okay. The next morning, Alt Maria waltzed into the school, captivating the males who wished to have a go at her. Blade greeted her, and she confirmed he was the great hero. Curious, he asked for her name, but she told him she had none, and when she walked away, the others referred to her as D Mao. Later, Blade met with Gil and learned from the principal that although Maria's mother was a human, her father was the former Demon King. Days pass, and Blade watches as D Mao had gotten popular in the academy, and wondered if it was okay to let her do as she liked, but since the principal said he'd take responsibility, it wasn't a matter they could pursue. Still, D Mao acted like the popular high school girl whom guys would go on to in their dorms. After she had gone, Claire wondered why Maria hadn't switched back since D Mao's great reveal, and she hoped she would switch back soon enough. Later that night, while Blade watched his dragon daughter, D Mao showed up in her succubus outfit and asked him out on a date. Even though he refused, she couldn't take no for an answer, so she whisked him into the air and stared at the beautiful moons. Up in the night sky, Blade learned not only about Maria's low self-esteem, but D Mao coming into existence 5 years ago. Afterwards, she took him to the rooftop and flashed him her plots, but Blade didn't react since he had already calmed his tiger minutes before she came. D Mao felt powerless seeing that he wasn't falling for her, so she came out clean, confessing that he was the reason she stayed at the academy and she couldn't seem to grasp how he rizzed her up and added her to his harem club. On a serious note, he revealed to her that he'll die if he used up to 15% of his powers, and she said fighting him wasn't worth her time, but she'd ensure she ended him if she had to leave the school. D Mao held his hands and confessed her feelings to him while asking for his premium mayonnaise, but he preferred they'd smack themselves in the arena. D Mao then informed him of how Maria's consciousness kept preventing her from removing the pendant on her neck. She called herself the byproduct of Maria's desire spurred from the hatred towards her father for abandoning her and causing her and her late mom to suffer. Currently, Maria was trapped deep within D Mao's subconsciousness, and there was a high possibility that she might never return. The reason why she opened up to Blade was because he was more similar to her kind than humans. A few days later, Eliza, a nerd and a friend of Maria, joined the others at the cafeteria and swore that the pendant was a ceiling item. When asked how to prove her hypothesis, Eliza told them, "Trust me, bro." She continues waffling about how the pendant was a recording device and could contain a message from her mother, and decoding the message could lead to D Mao disappearing forever. Despite knowing the consequences, D Mao agreed to it, so Eliza decrypted the message, and they saw a hologram of the Demon Lord, saying he was off to battle and wouldn't mind if Amelia, Maria's mother, resented him. While he revealed his choice of names and the future for his unborn child, D Mao had an internal battle, prepping up Maria to decide if she wanted to come back. As the message came to an end, D Mao shed tears as she told them Maria would resurface any moment from now. She then commanded that they beckon on their friend's name in one accord. In one stern voice, they did just that, and Maria regained her consciousness. Her father's late message then flashed across her mind, so she cried her eyes out. Several days later, Maria faced Blade in the arena, but just before the match began, she took off her glasses, revealing her second personality, D Mao, which meant she had balanced both personalities. After a long while, Blade and the three most important girls head to town and feast on a bucket pudding. After the meal, they come across Dione, a centaur, who happened to be taking a carriage to their school. Upon spotting Blade, she nearly revealed he was the hero, but he stopped her and told her to keep it a secret. The girls wondered how they knew each other, but Blade and Dione luckily got away without spilling the beans. Dione then asked Blade, like a jealous housewife, if the girls were his night companions, but he told her they're friends she shouldn't worry about. Upon seeing that Dione was Blade's acquaintance, Ku offered to help her with the carriage. So she asked where Dione is headed, and the centaur pointed at the school. Before they could ask her why, Gil showed up and assigned Dione as the academy's instructor. Shortly after Dione arrived at the academy, she demonstrated her talent on the training ground by blitzing through a series of god iron, melting them like they were candle waxes. Right after, she introduced herself as Dione the Demon Lance, and hearing the title made the students feel very honored, because she was the commander of the kingdom's cavalry corps. Out of habit, Dione told them that she wasn't as accomplished as the hero, and it made Aratus wonder who the great hero was, and how Dione knew Blade, who should be unrelated to the topic. Curious, Claire and the others decide to investigate how Dione knew Blade. After their training, as the students had a soak, Claire and Jessica, who were curious of Blade's past, washed Dione's back to get her to lower her guard and tell them about Blade and how they met. Blade, on the other hand, happened to wash Ku's hair, but he couldn't help but hear the funny noises coming from the other bathroom, so he charged right in like an officer of the law and got blessed with melons or different sizes. Ernest got mad and tried yelling at him to get out of their bathroom, but he reminded her that he had a permit. Jessica then informed them that he had the mental age of a 5-year-old, and she tested her theory out by showcasing her peaches, but Blade remained calm while burning the image into his memory. On the topic of 5-year-olds, Dione recalled it was the age Blade was when she came across him for the very first time. Worried, Blade tried to stop her from spilling the beans, but Dimao stealthily stopped him, saying she was interested in his past. Minutes later, they all have a soak, and Dione continued her tale of how Blade was so ferocious and he dug his teeth into her cakes thinking she was his dinner. And he left a mark on Dione, which would help her remember he was her first. Years later, Dione had trained so well that she joined the hero's forces. In the bathroom, as she rambled on about her accomplishment with the hero, Blade worriedly spoke to Sophie, hoping he wouldn't be found out, and Sophie assured him, saying everyone had the mental image of the great hero being much older. Relieved, Blade sighed, and Sophie told him his identity was their secret. Reluctantly, Blade revealed Dimao was aware of his identity, and it made Sophie jealous. Days later, Blade and Ernest went shopping for groceries in the capital. On their way, Ernest found out Dion's favorite food from him, so she asked him what his relationship was with Dionzi. From nowhere, a simurgh, one of the 4 continental sacred beasts, flew over the royal capital, and Blade assured Ernest that the bird wouldn't attack them as long as they didn't provoke it. To their surprise, it swooped at them and crushed a nearby carriage. Ernest instinctively reached for her sword, but Blade stopped her before she could do anything stupid. Right after, the bird leaves for the sky, and they realize there are 2 of the rare birds flying over their capital. Confused, Ernest wondered why they were in the capital, and as Blade put 2 and 2 together, after seeing the damaged carriage, he concluded that Gil was responsible. When they returned to the academy, Ernest confronted the king, asking him what must have been in Dione's carriage that could have attracted 2 simurghs to the capital. Gil then revealed to them that he took the bird's egg for 2 reasons. The first was to help the simurghs hatch their egg, and the second was to serve as a training for the students. Gil informed them that the next day was the only time left for them to help the egg hatch. At that point, Aratus agreed with Blade that their principal was a loony. The following day, Blade informed everyone of their mission, which was to hatch the rare beast, and they were to do that by defending the academy from the simurghs, who would get mad after spotting their eggs. Hours later, the birds picked and tossed away every carriage they could find, and thanks to the earlier evacuation, no lives were harmed. But to minimize proprietary damages, the students set out to stop the beasts. During the early hours, they tried out different tactics, ranging from hurling magic at the birds to resisting their movements. By sunset, the crane lifting the egg to the very peak of the building stopped working, and one of the birds had returned. Quickly, Sophie instructed Blade to get the egg while they tried to stall for time. At first, Blade insisted on helping them out, but Aratus told him to believe in them and carry out his own. Blade ran on the walls like he had bribed gravity, and to his surprise, Dione followed suit. She then carried him on her back, just like old times. With her help, they arrived at the crane on time, and she also helped him transport the egg to the top of the building. Gil congratulated them for their job well done, and as soon as they spotted an angry-looking simurgh charging at them, Gil assured them that he'll handle it. Unfortunately for him, he was swatted away like a cannon fodder and crashed into the egg. Annoyed, Blade used one of his sword techniques to buy time, but he quickly got tired after reaching his limits. The egg suddenly cracks, revealing 2 baby simurghs who looked at Blade and Sophie, registering the students as their parents. Days later, as Blade and Ernest fly around the capital on the chicks, Blade laughs, noting he was able to make more friends. One time, Blade walked in with a sword dripping with blood, and he faced Sophie, who informed him that she always wanted to go all out against him. With that, she activated her time stop skill and struck Blade severally. 10 seconds later, after her ability had worn out, Blade shocked her by revealing he wasn't affected by her attacks, which was due to the body hardening spell he had cast beforehand. In one move, he plunged his sword into her, and she dropped into her pool of blood. After taking down the last of them, Blade complains to Gil to get him out of the game, but Gil went on, waffling about the virtual technology and how it was related to magic despite it being scientific. The king then announced to the others that the virtual world was a place where they could practice freely and end themselves. Blade, on the other hand, complained of how realistic the virtual world was and would have trouble telling it apart from the real one. So Gil decided to help out by maxing the environment settings to make it appear unrealistic. Gil then told them that the last one standing would get to use the virtual reality machine, however they wanted as their reward. Elsewhere, Leonard ran up to Aratus for a fair battle, but she instantly turned him into a sashimi before poking him severely with her blades. After successfully ending Leonard's avatar, Aratus laughed like a psycho and headed straight for Blade. Meanwhile, Blade watched as Claire and Jessica fought with Kasim and Clay, and after being overpowered, they flashed their knockers as a counter, stunning them, and as a result, they got instantly bodied. By that time, Aratus arrived looking like the Grim Reaper, and she announced how death-blowing people in the game felt fun. Concluding that she had gone berserk, Blade took up a weapon and sent shockwaves at the girls, and after a while of spamming the same move faster than hitting F5, he woke up and found out he was the last one standing. While others praised him and expected such an outcome, Erna sulked as she recalled acting unladylike, and Blade kicked her where it hurt with his sharp tongue. As a result, they argued back and forth, entertaining Gil, the shameless king who enjoyed causing trouble for his students. Immediately, Blade tweaked the virtual machine settings, cranking it to the extreme, ensuring ferocious demons roamed the fabricated world filled with booby traps. He attached the cord on Gil, ensuring that he faced such extreme difficulties. Still not satisfied, Blade asked Siren to ensure the principal kept on respawning over and over until nighttime. After the training, The others apart from Kasim and Clay, the boys who dropped their guard to Jessica's whimsical tactics, happily returned to have lunch. As Blade stuffed his tummy with his favorite food, the girls noticed the boys sulking after their loss, so they asked what happened. Blade, who witnessed the battle firsthand, explained that they lost to Jessica and Claire due to not taking the battle seriously and always skipping training. Days later, Blade and the others saw a flyer of the thermae the king was constructing for them, so they decided to check the place out. There, they met Dione, who took them in to have a dip at the hot spring. Inside, they learned it was a mixed hot spring, whereby little to no plot armors were allowed to be worn. As the students had a soak, they noticed Maria hadn't taken off her glasses because if she did, she would switch to Di Mao, who would reveal her cakes and milkers to the entire populace. The odd students at the spring were the sulking boys and Ernest, who took her towel along, unlike the rest of them. Suddenly, Gil showed up without a care in the world about his unveiled magnum, and yelled at Ernest to get rid of her towel. He even tweaked the kingdom's constitution to follow his agenda, and revealed he created the Therma to feast his eyes on their milkers. The boys agreed with him and urged Aratus to remove her towel since she wore her swimsuit. It seemed weird to the others who have seen Aratus in little to no outfit whenever she used Asmodeus's power, so they found it strange that she was acting all embarrassed. The protest went on and on till Gil's assistant knocked the lights out of the king and dragged him indoors to cool his throbbing saber. With him out of the picture, Aratus boldly showcased her swimsuit, but Blade had had enough fill from the others. Jessica and Claire tried comforting the sulking boys out of concern, but each time they talked they rubbed salt on their injuries, causing them to flee. Later that night, Blade met with the boys and tried cheering them up, but they couldn't relate to him, who hadn't lost a battle in the academy before. Clay and Kasim then revealed that they liked Claire and Jessica, but Blade found it hard to comprehend what they were talking about. Ku showed up right on time and advised them to get stronger if they wanted the girls to fall for them. They agreed with her, after which she told them they needed special training from Blade. Meanwhile, Claire and Jessica met at Aratus' room and discussed their concerns for the boys who kept on sulking after their defeat. As they brainstormed on what to do, Ku showed up and advised that they got stronger, claiming that boys loved stronger girls. Even though the girls denied having such feelings towards the boys, they decided to carry on with the training. Time passed, and Blade whipped the boys into shape, teaching them how to consciously manifest their fighting spirits. The day of their rematch finally arrived, so they met up at the arena and logged into the virtual world where they could go all out. Before Blade commenced the match, Ernest advised them to calmly accept the results of the match no matter the outcome. With that, the match began with the boys evading and parrying the girls' attacks like they were up against insane game bosses. They also followed up by manifesting their fighting spirits and firing the elements at the girls. Unknown to them that the girls had also undergone their special training, their situation got flipped in an instant and the girls easily one-shot them. This time around, they shook hands with the girls and acknowledged their strengths, thanking them for not going easy on them, and they vowed to get stronger. Realizing Claire and Jessica were taught by the powerful girls in the advanced rank, the boys complained about it, but Aratus quickly interrupted, saying it was only fair since they were taught by someone superior. She then corrected their notion about being stronger than the one they love, when they could simply get the message across by confessing to them. As if calling the kettle black, she stared at Blade, realizing that it would be too much for her to think she could surpass him, and at the same time confess to him. Sometime later, right outside the academy, the girls noticed a cute robot called Iona watching the students. So Claire immediately latched onto it like it was a limited edition luxury bag. Sophie noticed it had been there for about a week, and they wondered if it was waiting for someone. As if listening to them, it showed them Blade's image, so they took it with them into the academy. Meanwhile, as Blade meditated, building his fighting spirit, Ku leapt at him, but his energy knocked her off, so he rushed to check on her and explained that it was his only way to go, given he couldn't use up to 15% of his true power. The rest of the girls showed up, and on spotting Iona, Blade shocked everyone by instantly demolishing the bot in a single attack. Pissed, Aratus yelled at him for attacking Iona, but he told her he needed to destroy it, calling it a guardian. While they argued back and forth, the robot examined Ernest closely and decided to update itself. Later, it showed up looking like a hottie, asking if she could finally get to hop on his sausage since he loved women with big melons. Blade then informed her that he didn't rock with AI. Iona got offended and fired a key blast at him, but he sent her crashing his sword and spammed the heavy attack like the triangle button on a console. Annoyed, Ernest whacked him on the head for belittling Robo-Girls, but he assured her Iona was fine and would show up just like before, and just like he said, Iona came that evening, and this time Ernest stopped Blade from attacking her. They soon learned that she was created to get rid of Blade, but was currently tasked to observe him. Claire then advised Iona to join forces with them if she planned on taking Blade down. When they commenced their plan after school hours, they learned that the reason Iona was after Blade was because he infiltrated her floodgates and kept on desecrating her chassis. The girls gave him the judgmental look, so he quickly cleared the air that he simply broke into the area she was guarding, and he did that with the master key he borrowed from Gil. Curious, they wondered where and why he had to trespass, so Blade told them he accessed the Royal Library of Banned Books not far from the school, and he did that to look up things about Asmodeus. Upon realizing that Blade went through all the trouble for her, Ernest went beet red, but Iona crushed her feelings by informing her that Blade had trespassed 13 more times. After being told the number of times Blade shattered Iona, the girl scolded him. He stormed off annoyed and headed for his dormitory. Sophie immediately went after him and confirmed he broke into the library because of his duties as the great hero. He also explained that bots like Iona stored their souls elsewhere, which was why he could continue destroying their bodies without feeling bad about it. Sophie then asked him if his stance would change if he could totally get rid of Iona, and at that point, Blade said he didn't know after all, he was no longer the great hero. Back at the meeting, Eliza cooked up a reason as to why Iona couldn't defeat Blade, saying Blade was relentless because Iona didn't die even when destroyed. Ernest and the others agreed Blade could be cold and scary at times, so Eliza suggested they came up with ways to prevent Iona's defeat. Within a few minutes, she came up with a plan which she called the Standalone Complex. It involved putting Iona's soul within her, which would make her cease to exist if destroyed, and for that reason they wonder if Blade would be able to finish her off. After successfully carrying out their plan, they arranged a rematch at the arena. There, Iona told him she could die permanently. She let him cop a feel, with the excuse of proving her soul was inside her. With that, the match commenced and Blade restricted himself from using his sword. So he simply evaded and tried using wind pressure to knock her off. Finally on the offense after all their previous battle, Iona went all out on him, knocking the air out of his lungs and smacking him badly. At that point, which was considered the first time ever in their academy, Blade accepted defeat. Later during lunch, they noticed Iona had ordered a feast to celebrate her victory, but she experienced burnout syndrome after fulfilling her lifelong desires. She then explained to them that there was a ticking counter caused because she got disconnected from the mother computer for neglecting her duties and stealing lots of terabytes of information from. She believed that the only way for the timer to go off was to have another master. Left with no choice, Blade took up the role, and ever since he had no freedom due to the robot pushing herself and asking for orders. Sophie, on the other hand, got mad because Iona was slowly stealing not only her spotlight but her character, so she quarreled with the boy and stared at Blade, wishing he'd do something about it. Instead, the dumb boy commanded the girls not to give him any trouble. When he returned into the building, he met the girls competing for his glizzy, and they even fought in the arena for it, so he smacked them and told them they were disqualified. Rather than go at it directly, they decided to compete with each other on who can please Blade the most, so they helped him with his bath, and even decided to watch him sleep. Their rivalry opened up a new path of friendship since they had always been alone, and it was thanks to Blade they were able to touch grass and interact with others. The new feeling enveloped them, and they got closer than they were days ago. The following day they ate, but just when things looked like they were returning to normalcy, Blade had a hunch, so he checked the counter and realized it was still ticking. Eliza properly examined it and realized Iona had 20 hours left to live, so they asked her how she'd like to spend her last moments. Iona then replied that she'd like to spend it with them before detonation far away, so she wouldn't hurt anyone nearby. They quickly organized a send-forth party for the bot, which wondered if it was alright for her to be with them. Sophie then advised her to enjoy the little time left for as much as she could. Later that night, while the party went on, Aratus looked around for Blade but couldn't find him anywhere. When the time remained a minute left for Iona, she created a barrier, separating herself from the others, and then thanked Sophie for everything, saying it was thanks to her she was able to become human. Sophie and the others cried as Iona wished her farewell, and as the counter reduced to single digits, Iona confessed that she was scared and didn't want to go. When it reached 0, everyone closed their eyes expecting an impact, but to their surprise they saw her still standing there. In that moment, Blade made his way through the ground, and Aratus became a victim of his plot-finding hands. Aratus grabbed him, asking him where he'd been all the while, and he confessed he went to coerce the mother computer to spare Iona. To confirm what he said, Iona checked her connection, and saw it had been restored with her mother. As the others celebrated, Sophie told Iona to do what she wanted to do, so in tears she leapt at Blade and hugged him, burying his face in her milkers. As usual, Aratus got upset while watching him enjoy the plumpiness of another girl, so she yelled that she changed her mind regarding the whole ordeal, since it meant more competition for Blade's sausage. A few days later, at Rosewood Academy's Battle Royal, a test to gauge each student's growth commenced, but it didn't go as planned because Blade stomped the others like roaches. Leonard, who's the last man standing, assured the others of victory while hyping up his ability in front of the laid-back Blade. The sore losers tried to motivate Leonard and also guilt-trip Blade into losing the duel, but he couldn't care less about them and simply wanted to go on right after the match. Leonard swore to bring victory upon Aratus' name, but she was surprised that he hadn't been knocked out, and it destroyed what was left of his self-esteem. Jessica and Ernest discussed Blade's habit of dealing with weaklings last, while Maria cheered Leonard on seconds later. Leonard charged at Blade, but the Quicksilver from Walmart evaded his skill effortlessly, leaving him to eat his dust. Right after the end of the battle, the other students left together and said it was a natural outcome after all. A rabbit can't win against a tiger, but the bloody simp still tried to stay strong with Aratus' motivation. Unfortunately, she was more interested in stuffing her mouth with glizzies than giving him any form of attention, and he lost his last bits of confidence. Leonard then thanked Blade and noted that he didn't stand a chance against him. Meanwhile, Maria watched him with a troubled face. Back in the Academy's residence hall, Maria briefly heard Mao's voice in the shower, claiming that she was a bit surprised. Meanwhile, in Leonard's room, he thought about Blade's strength, and just like Kanye's single, he wondered if he could defeat Blade to gain the Empress's attention. Just then, he regained his confidence and decided to repair his weapon. The following day, Maria met Leonard in the courtyard and asked if he was okay with smiling after losing to Blade, whom he really wanted to defeat. Leonard said she won't understand, and she affirmed, claiming that it's frustrating because she wants to be by Blade's side and not behind. Leonard noticed her feelings, but she quickly twisted his perception, claiming that it was Mao's declaration of rivalry. Leonard asked Maria if she wanted to end Blade, but she rejected the notion and told him she saw how he was trying to put himself down and couldn't bear to see him cast his desire to rival and defeat him. Instantly, Maria apologized for acting selfishly, but he thanked her and declared that he must defeat Blade at all cost or else Aratus wouldn't look his way. Maria happily cheered him on, saying she was rooting for him, but just then, Eliza interrupted their conversation, called them idealistic, and asked how they intended to defeat such a superorganism. The nerd suggested that they use her gray matter, but by then D-Mao switched with Maria and asked for her identity. Later, Leonard gathered the Superorganism Suppression Committee for the first session and welcomed them, but Aratus asked why he was the chairman, and as a counter, Eliza asked why attended. Just like the others, Aratus admitted that she wanted to beat Blade badly. Leonard continued his anti-superorganism speech, but realized that some members weren't on the same page with him. He then asked for ideas on how to defeat Blade, so Jessica and Claire suggested attacking him in his sleep or poisoning him. Ernest immediately rejected their ideas, calling them cowardly. But Eliza countered her claims, saying being a superorganism is what should be considered cowardly, and it's only natural for them to use any other means available to take him down. The other agreed with her, and sending the tension, Leonard asked them to face Blade with whatever effort they deemed fit. With that, they declare their vows to defeat Blade, and they cheered in unison. Moments later, Aratus confronted Blade with Leonard's lance, but he easily parried her attack, which ended up damaging Leonard's weapon in the process. Later at their next meeting, Leonard broke down in tears because his lance broke, and Aratus thanked him for letting her use it. Jessica then claimed that it was her turn, and left to enact her plan. Late at night, she infiltrated Blade's room, but was cooked to char by Iona's automatic function. In the third session, Jessica asked Iona why she did so, when they're on the same side, but Iona blamed the function, and Leonard declared that he'd go next. Later that day, Leonard confronted Blade, declaring he'd finally take him down, but Blade simply asked him if he wasn't tired already. Leonard then activated his technique, but the lance fell apart like Lego bricks, and the wuss broke down again in tears during the fourth session. However, Maria said she would avenge them along with Mao and started stalking Blade. At the cafeteria, she found him lacking, and Mao tried to get him from behind, but she was knocked out during her introduction. When it was Sophie's turn, she took Blade on fair and square, but he easily weaved her kick and smacked the daylights out of her that she had a change of heart during the sixth session, saying she was happy as long as Blade also was happy. Right afterwards, Claire tried to hit him from behind with her club, but she tripped on his foot and got her face printed on the ground. Kasim and Clay also tried using underhanded tactics, but Blade didn't budge. Other members of the committee tried every underhanded means, but they failed to defeat the superorganism. Ernest even tried rock, paper, scissors, but lost every bout until she injured her hand, and was made fun of by the doctor. Realizing they couldn't beat him in physical contests, they switched over to endurance contests, but Blade kept beating them in every single bout. In their 11th meeting, Ernest complained a lot, and came up with the idea of casting lots with only losses written on the cards. At that point, Leonard asked them if they could remember their original goal. While the others struggled to recall what it was, Aratus reminded them of her desire to win against Blade. Leonard agreed with her, and like One Piece, he wondered if the victory could be the friends they made along the way. Others kind of agreed with him except Aratus, who was crashing out and brimming with hate. Iona then made a suggestion, but none of them looked at her idea. Instead, they made an Evangelion reference out of her, clapping and deciding they'd use her as a hostage. Leonard's idealism immediately kicked in, and he felt bad about not being able to face Blade fair and square, but Ernest destroyed his knightly ideals with her unbridled passion, declaring she would drink swamp water if needed to take down that cheat engine. Her passion psyched up the others, and she took over as the head of the meeting. The following day, as the doctor lectured the students on healing magic, Blade noticed that some students were missing. Quickly, Aratus tried making up an excuse, and nearly blew their cover, but Jessica quickly stopped her from spilling anything, and Claire came to their rescue. Seconds later, 3 musketeers barged into the classroom, and Ernest claimed they were terrorists. Unfortunately for them, Blade had no idea what the term meant and couldn't understand Sophie's explanation, but when Ernest called them bad guys, everything clicked. The terrorists abducted the doctor, and they ordered the unconcerned students to leave the classroom. Blade, who had no clue of what was going on, tried leaving with them, but Aratus stopped him and asked him to save the hostage. The doctor at first wondered what was going on, but after her captors briefed her in, asking her to play along with their schemes, she perfectly sounded like a damsel in distress, and it had the girls wishing to swap places with her so that Blade could rescue them. After a lot of haggling, Ernest joyfully swapped positions with her. Meanwhile, Kui fed Blade the wrong meaning of hostage, and he couldn't understand the concept, so he simply watched them insult him one after the other. They then reminded him to take things seriously, and begged him to save them again. Blade was very confused, so he revealed the identity of the terrorists, wondering what and why they were wearing masks. They asked him when he knew who they were, and he said since the very beginning, after all, he knew the way they walked and talked. Leonard and the other two were frustrated, but Kasim noticed that he could continue the plan, so grabbed some hostages knockers, but the girls angrily knocked him out. Leonard claimed that Blade was weak to hostages using Iona's scenario, and ordered him to admit defeat, which the others also clamored for. Quickly, he swiftly put a sword to Aratus' neck, and his look became serious. The girls then pestered Blade, wondering what he would do. Instantly, Blade fired a wind attack that not only destroyed their plot armors but got rid of Leonard's weapon. As if that wasn't enough, he explained the principle behind the technique to them. Ernest had lost it at that point, so she ordered everyone to attack him at once, but Blade dealt with them effortlessly. He concluded that it was a game of make-believe, but it frustrated the others, who finally lost interest in defeating him. Still hungry for more, he asked them to continue, but they all refused. Unlike the others, Aratus refused to give up, and the 334th session commenced. Leonard tried to keep everyone on track, but Eliza suggested that they give up, and he realized that only Aratus was motivated. The other girls noticed that he was trying so hard to please her and felt sorry for him because she was only obsessed with being the first on the queue to feel Blade's hammer. Blade and Ernest got some food at the cafeteria and noticed some students celebrating their friend's birthday. The ignorant dolt who didn't have the best childhood asked what was happening, and she told him what it was but realized that he didn't know anything about the celebration nor the day he was born. Moments later, the girls had a tea party outside, and Aratus told them about her discovery. Dione, who was with them, confessed that she also didn't know Blade's exact age because he could already stand and walk when he was found. They all tried to decipher when he was born, but it was all guesswork. According to the rumors, he was given the name Blade because he was found holding a sword. With that out of the way, they wonder what to give him as a gift, so Ernest suggested they offer him tonkatsu curry, his favorite dish. To their surprise, Gil showed up and supported the food idea. But the girls didn't want to give Blade something he could get at the cafeteria. Gil then informed them that they could make the food special by having it prepared with special ingredients. With that, he took the students to the royal pantry, which looked like another dimension different from their country. There, they were tasked to eat delicious food while they got hands-on training. Blade asked for more inquiries while some of the girls discussed the possible location of the open world the doors led to. The king declared that they couldn't leave until they fulfilled some conditions, and Siren read out the absurd condition. Dione talked about the preserved exquisite ingredients in the wide space, and the king ordered them to thin out the wild plants and animals, thereby killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Blade noted that it was a job for a group of hero-level warriors and tried to get Aratus support, but she motivated the others, who immediately commenced the mission with fire in their eyes. The students quickly adapted to the jungle lifestyle and created an ancient-like settlement there. Jessica swung around like Tarzan and led a wild animal towards a trap, but it left her and started chasing Claire instead. Leonard tried to save her, but the beast knocked the living daylight out of him. Maria transformed into Dimao to fight, and immediately toasted the beast after noticing Blade's arrival, and they acquired food. Later that day, they brought the game back to the settlement, and after a short while, Blade noticed that everyone was having fun working together in the ancient setting. He smirked after seeing Ernest instructing the others, and left to continue what he intended to do. At night, Blade took a bath in the forest, and wondered if this was the first good decision Gil had made. Shortly after, Aratus joined him, asking him not to stare. Unlike every other teenage boy, Blade kept his promise. She then noticed the scars on his chest, and asked him what his childhood was like. Blade then explained that he fought every hour of the day for his life. Realizing how rough he must have had it, she touched the scars and leaned closer to him. Fortunately, Claire rushed in, preventing her from getting knocked up that night. Some days later, the students had not only built settlements but had established a very good way of living. Leonard wondered how many calories they had consumed, and Iona instantly gave them a detailed breakdown of how far they had gone and deduced the date of completion, thanks to her computerized memory. Gil showed up happy at their advancement and praised their performance in the survival test. But the students realized that he had forgotten the original goal, so he immediately coordinated himself and continued his speech related to the test. He showed them some detailed posters and claimed that he had prepared a special challenge. He threw the posters randomly into the crowd and asked if they were up to the task. Blade noticed the rise in his friend's spirits and wondered how the ingredients in the posters were different from the ones they had faced so far. Moments later, the students faced a cabbage monster in a cave, and it caught Aratus with its tentacles, but she easily sliced through them. Maria then read the information about the Emperor Cabbage from the poster and noted that it had undergone adaptive evolution. The monster's offensive attacks were easily blocked, and Aratus tried to burn it to char, but Sophie stopped her because they needed it raw. Aratus then rallied up her team and charged at the monster, but Leonard knocked Blade out of his path like a useless NPC. They defeated the Emperor Cabbage, and Blade wondered why they were so fired up. The students continued their search and discovered the boxing corn, and Blade tried to confront it with a sword, but was stopped by Sophie, who gave him boxing gloves to use. Maria read the requirements to capture it, and Blade tried to get substituted, but the monster knocked the idea out of him, and the boxing match began. Shortly after, the monster was defeated, but Blade looked like his favorite toy had been run over by a car. As they continued, they encountered some other monsters, and arrived at the area where they picked some pepper monsters with really strong spice leaching out into the air. Ko, on the other hand, led Maria and Eliza to a sunflower plantation, where they are barbecued by the myriad laser beams released by the sunflowers. And Eliza immediately read out the information on the monsters. Maria transformed into Mao and charged at the monsters while Eliza cheered them on. Meanwhile, Blade and the others discovered some large carrots, and he tried to pull one out, but it released a loud shriek. Ernest stopped him and read out some important information about it, but Iona pulled them out because she couldn't be affected by curses. The carrots shrieked, and the birds and trees in their proximity withered away. Later that day, they moved the carrot back to base, and Aratus realized that Blade didn't like carrots. At night, they held a banquet, and Gil acknowledged the efforts of the students in the royal pantry and declared that they would face the final ingredient next. The following day, they arrived at the base of a massive tree, and Iona noted that it was the spot with the richest nutrients. Shortly after, the Beast King showed up, and Sophie read the vague information about it. Gil watched with excitement, and Dione cheered Blade on. To their surprise, the Beast King was squashed like a filthy bug by a bigger threat, the Behemoth. Despite it looking like a disaster out of Jurassic Park, the king ordered them to defeat it, claiming that its meat is tastier. As if possessed, the students were fired up by these claims, and they commenced their attacks, but it had no effect. Behemoth knocked many of them off easily, but they kept trying. It prepared a breath attack, and Leonard blocked it with his defensive spell. Ernest left the rest to Blade, and he requested D-Mao's assistance because he couldn't defeat it with the amount of power he had unlocked. He gave her his spiritual energy, but she kissed him to collect it faster. Afterwards, the others bought them a few seconds, and the duo slashed Behemoth like butter with the Demon Blade technique. Blade lay on the ground exhausted, and stated that he was hungry while the other students celebrated their victory. Later that day, the doctor told Blade that his strength had increased to 18%, and she listed the possible reasons why it did. He then left to go get some food, but barged into his birthday celebration. Ernest and his other friends explained what the celebration was, and offered him tonkatsu curry made from ingredients in the royal pantry. King showed up and asked if he was amused, but his eyes brightened because he had never experienced such feelings. Shortly after, he bawled his eyes out while enjoying the delicious meal. On a fateful day, Clay practiced the Dragon Smash skill, and Kasem complimented him. But Sophie arrived and recreated the skill on a whole new level entirely. Blade acknowledged that it was how the ideal skill should be, and the other two praised her. But surprisingly, another Sophie appeared and confronted the imposter. After gathering some attention, the imposter escaped and left everyone astonished. Later that day, the imposter jumped around on roofs like a Super Mario character and arrived at a secret warehouse where other Sophie doppelgangers are. She was referred to as Un by the other clones, who had different psychotic personalities, and they asked about her mission. She made some valid excuses, but the condescending clone Troa claimed that she failed, and Un ordered the battle-crazed clone Sync to clobber the annoying pest. After failing to explain in words, Dux kissed Un to collect empirical data through mucosal contact, and the kisses went round. They saw what happened at the arena and immediately cooked Un because they didn't give two fingers about teaching Dragon Smash to others. The following day, Jessica showed off a new weapon skill and praised Eliza's prototype invention after roasting the training dummy. Blade tried to normalize the ability, but Eliza went off on him because he was the only abnormal one. Suddenly, Duke arrived at the arena and made some absurd requests before challenging Blade to a fight. The clash created shockwaves, and Deuce retreated when Sophie showed up. At lunch, the students discussed the recent doppelganger issue, and Aradas wondered if they were Sophie's sisters. The others noted that she had picked up Blade's unreflective personality, and she immediately switched to Empress mode in the twinkling of an eye. Just then, Altia suggested that the doppelgangers really wanted to kill Blade, but the other students normalized it because they all had the same idea playing in their empty heads. Ernest concluded shortly after that they were assassins, and Sophie declared that she'd protect Blade. Back at the doppelganger's base, Sync made fun of the others because they failed to kill Blade, but they made up excuses to feel better. A shady man summoned them and urged them to prove the validity of his research by ending the great hero. Ono and the other girls received the order and immediately departed to annihilate Blade. That night, Sophie entered Blade's room, and it triggered Iona's defenses, but she stopped after confirming her identity. Iona assured her of Blade's safety, but suggested that she sleep in the room to increase the security level. To her surprise, Sophie rejected the offer and declared her intention to protect Blade in her own way. She left the room and encountered Own, whom she tried to talk out of it, but Own prioritized the mission and attacked her instead. Sophie blocked her attack, knocked her down, and mounted her in a ground-and-pound wrestling style, but stopped right before striking. She released her, and Own stated that they would be waiting in the shadows as she did the legendary villain retreat. The next day, the students led Sync into a virtual reality world and got some important information from her, because she had a really low IQ. As the psycho chased after them, Aratus urged Blade to stick to the plan, but a stone hit his head. He tripped and Sync punched the living daylight out of him while his friends watched. After exiting the VR world, the others woke Blade, and Eliza explained that their plan succeeded because Sync left thinking it was all real. Later that day, Sync broke through walls like Hulk from Temu, and chased Blade after realizing that she had been fooled. Blade ran through the corridor, and Iona gave him a breakdown of the building's damage, but they were intercepted by another doppelganger. They evaded her, and Iona rage-baited them so they would continue the chase. Meanwhile, Ernest readied the mages who didn't seem confident in their abilities, and Blade led the doppelgangers into their path. The mages cast their spells, but it didn't stop them, and Ernest then tried her spell, which stopped Dokes. Blade, on the other hand, luckily stopped Sync from hitting Ernest, and she noted that he could also use magic. However, the duo held hands to create a massive black hole that sucked in everything in its proximity with their artificial great hero skill. The students tried to hold out, but realized that it didn't have a time limit. The skill nearly sucked in some mages, but Blade saved them. Sophie showed up just in time and created a mini black hole, which sucked in the larger one, and she concealed it in her palms but lost consciousness from the effect. Like a man with style, Blade caught her before she hit the ground, and in that moment he saw the other 5 doppelgangers who stared at him, before walking away with their unconscious counterparts. Later that day, Sophie regained consciousness, and Blade offered her some apples he had cut the way she liked. She ate them, and asked about the casualties and learned that no one died. He briefed her about everything, and told her not to worry, but she still apologized for causing trouble. He then asked about the doppelgangers, and she told him how they were created with the same technology as she was by the artificial Great Hero Project. Sophie claimed that the king rescued her and called Blade her salvation, but the doppelgangers didn't have anyone to save them. Blade felt bad again and apologized for making them go through such horrible things as the Great Hero and hoped to become friends with the doppelgangers too, but she stated that it wouldn't be possible. She explained the modifications the girls went through, which she escaped, and how the programming controlled them to always try to send the Great Hero to the depths of Tartarus. He noticed that she was crying and gave her a really warm hug that she desperately needed. That night, Blade slept by her bedside, but she secretly left without saying anything. Later, Gil summoned the students to his office and told them about Sophie's withdrawal from the academy, and Aratus lashed out at the king for letting her go, but Blade pointed out that the king wasn't happy about it either. Aratus' tone did a 360, and she declared that they would bring her back, but he asked if they knew where she was headed. Blade guessed that she'd be searching for her sisters, and Jessica took out a note containing some important information. They decided to commence their quest, but the king stopped them and asked if they knew her true intentions. He explained how she didn't want to involve them, because the only way to stop the doppelgangers is to end them. Before leaving, he asked the students to think about it again. The next morning, Hu and Iona joined Blade in search for Sophie, and Dimao came later. They set out to leave at dawn, but met the other students waiting for them at the gate. Blade apologized for coming late, and they began their operation Bring Sophie Back to the academy. Sophie arrived at the doppelganger's base and walked into the pathetic warehouse, but it was empty. She left and noticed Aratus approaching the area on a flying monster, but ignored her and tried to leave. Aratus notified Eliza and tried to communicate with Sophie, but the baddie, who didn't come around for a sermon, requested Aratus to let her be. Realizing how adamant Aratus was, Sophie revealed the truth about herself being the 12th test subject of the Artificial Hero Project, and how despite the people involved in the project being arrested, the appearance of the doppelgangers showed that someone continued the research. Aratus asked why people are after Blade's life, but jumped to a conclusion on her own, which the others related to. Sophie apologized for involving them and tried to break her bond with them to protect them, even at the cost of her own life, but Aratus scolded her instead. After bringing Sophie back on track, Blade declared that they won't need to kill the doppelgangers, but Sophie explained how their neural programming worked, and emphasized that the doppelgangers don't have much time left either. Blade stated that he had no plan but still wanted to save them, and he asked the others to help him. They agreed, and he left the planning to Eliza, who claimed to have made one already. At the same time, at the new base, woke the unconscious doppelgangers with threats, and their shady creator reiterated their goal. Soon after the other two entered the room, they showed Umpraulo the letter of challenge they found outside, and guessed that it was a trap, but she read the content and decided to end things. However, Blade waited at the arena ready for battle, and the others watched from the stands, wondering if the doppelgangers would respond to the challenge, but Sophie affirmed that they would. Seconds later, Ku sniffed out the doppelgangers' scent, and Iona confirmed their arrival. Blade welcomed them and hoped to be friends with them, but the hostile visitors declared their intention to erase his existence. The 5v1 commenced, and Eliza told Blade to endure their attacks while trying to deplete their energies, but the alleged superorganism struggled to keep up with the bombardment. Meanwhile, Dione and Siren coordinated the plans made to capture the doppelgangers and the entity giving them orders, but the useless king enjoyed the thrill of the exercise. Eliza gave Blade some assurance, but he was disarmed by the relentless strikes, and Aratus felt the urge to help him, but Sophie stopped her. They decided to have faith in him, and he repelled the 5 of them with a magic barrier. His dire condition got Aratus frustrated. At the last moment, the doppelgangers started using their special powers to attack Blade. Just then, his friends tossed him capsules containing their ultimate skills, and he inserted them into his sword and countered some of the opponent's special powers. His sword fell apart on the 3rd turn, and he was left vulnerable to the oncoming attacks. Blade then demanded Aratus' capsule, but he was interrupted by the psychotic clone Sync, who only thought of destroying things. Sophie immediately swooped in to save him, recovered Aratus' capsule, and offered her life to him. He countered Sync's special power with Sophie's technique and collected Un's capsule from her. He confronted Un and blocked her special power with Aratus' spell and the capsule. As the sun rose, Un stated that her time was up, and her arm fell off just before she collapsed. Blade hurried to her side, and she informed him that she had till sunset, which he relayed to Eliza. Eliza reviewed the documents she discovered on them, and guessed that the doppelganger's days are limited to 14. Claire tried to heal Un, but it didn't work, and Eliza explained why it didn't. She also stated that they found their creator, but he was already dead by the time the girls were born. Frustrated, Eliza apologized because her science couldn't do anything with the limited time they had, but Sophie asked Blade to gather all her sisters. Moments later, Sophie held Un and claimed that there was a way to save them, but Un wasn't interested in living because she had failed her mission. Blade made them believe they could surpass him, and the exhausted sisters decided to stay motivated. Un used her special power, and Sophie asked Blade to take control of it, and he transferred their consciousness to Sophie. The following day, Blade woke up in the hospital, and Un visited him through Sophie. She hoped that he'd get better and swore to end him, but he asked about the others instead. Un replied that they wanted to speak to him and immediately switched consciousness to Sophie. He asked if she was okay, and she affirmed, comparing her situation to having 6 children, but he wondered why it was 6 and not 5. At the arena, the students took on a dragon, but it easily fended them off. Kush transformed into her dragon form and tried to brawl. but she lost the contest of strength. As usual, the view kept the king edging in his seat, while the doctor asked his attendants about the monster's status. After the briefing, she concluded that she'd be busy after the exercise, since the king had a fetish for watching his student get beaten up by monsters. The dragon knocks the lights out of Ku, and Ernest bombarded it with her techniques, but Asmodeus couldn't hold out after a while. The insignificant Leonard tried his best, but he got mollywopped by the dragon. Sophie caught his weapon and used the power of all the personalities within her, but there was no effect. The other students tried their luck, but they all failed, and Siren wondered if it was a bad idea, but the king told them not to worry. As Gil had anticipated, Blade swooped in and defeated it with one blow, and it got his friends mad at him and they called him a superorganism since he was a living cheat engine. We've come to the end of the lovely recap. Comment your best girl, and if you agree with me that the doctor had better chances, state why, and the next anime you'd like me to recap.